Welcome to Inside Image, presented by Seismic Sound Off. I'm your host, Andrew Gary. Geoscientists Without Borders has spent 20 years putting geoscience to work on problems that can change people's lives. Craig Beasley helped build the program around humanitarian work, real geoscience, and students. Jim Funk has personally seen what something as basic as finding clean water can mean to a community. And the projects go much wider than water. Earthquakes, volcanoes, coastal hazards, even using near-surface imaging to help recover forgotten graves right here in Houston. What GWB does not lack is need. Dozens of proposals can come in when only a handful can be funded. That is the tension at the heart of this conversation. The profession has proven that humanitarian geoscience works. More funding would allow GWB to take on bigger projects, stay with them longer, and reach many more people. Let's join the discussion.
Well, it's an honor to have Jim Funk and Craig Beasley here to talk about GWB and SLB. We're celebrating 20 years of GWB and 100 years of SLB, and why SLB is part of this conversation because they helped found GWB 20 years ago. And we'll start there, Craig. For someone here at Image who may have heard the name Geoscientists Without Borders, but maybe not know quite the program and couldn't explain it to someone, what should they try to understand about GWB's accomplishments over these past 20 years?
Well, I think to understand about the accomplishments, it's useful to know the principles that we use to found the Geoscientists Without Borders. Believe it or not, it's not very easy to get a large company to hand over $1 million to start a charitable organization that's never done anything yet, has no track record. So we had to come up with the right combination of elements that would interest both the foundation and potential donors, as well as the founding donor, Schlumberger. And it was a hit and miss thing for a number of years, 3 or 4 years, until we finally hit on the right combination. But the combination is to do, first of all, do good, do humanitarian projects that use geosciences. And the second thing is to try to involve the next generation. So the projects must involve students in a significant way. And of course, the third thing, it must use the geosciences in a significant way. So with this and the underlying message that Schlumberger, by making this donation, was reaching out to the larger geoscience community, particular students and universities, I think was the main factor that people need to understand. So it's real simple. Just remember, it's doing charitable projects that change people's lives, water, pollution, natural disasters. All of these things are things that we address, as well as things you might not think of, like archaeology, for example. And it's done generally in partnership with universities that use students in a significant way. So we hope to inspire the next generation to want to come into the geosciences.
That's a great lead into Jim, because the AAPG Foundation is really focusing on geoscience education and students. And you mentioned like Chevron with the Student Leadership Symposium. These organizations have been supporting this with students. You know, what makes humanitarian geoscience an important part of the mission of the AAPG Foundation?
It's the fact that we all are aware of global poverty and the lack of water, and that water is all about geology and geophysics and finding where to drill the wells. And so I think it aligns very well with AAPG's goals of education, geoscience, and charity, doing good for humankind. For me personally, I got involved with GWB and SEG through Mike Forrest asking me to donate to it. And I spent a lot of time in African countries witnessing abject poverty, what the lack of water does. And then I've had the joy of seeing what, when people get water, does. So for me personally, and I think for a number of my colleagues in AAPG, it aligns very well with what we see as a great human need.
Yeah. Speaking of that experience of you seeing it firsthand, Craig, you've probably seen it firsthand as well and have just been involved with GWB from the beginning. What would you want to share with people out there? A lot of GWB, the AAPG Foundation as well, individual donors are key aspects to fund these foundations. what would you like to share with them that may not just understand of the value of their dollar going to programs like GWB that can just make a bigger difference than they may understand because they're just not familiar with the issues that these programs are dealing with?
Well, the first thing I would point out is just how much this program gets done on such a small budget, relatively speaking. When we started the program, we didn't have a lot of money. It's still the same 20 years later. We're still looking for donors. But the donors can be certain that their funds go a long way. The first thing that we told people was, look, we're not going to solve world hunger or any other worldwide humanitarian problem on a $50,000 project. So that's the maximum we currently give, and they can actually get 2 years worth of that. So it's $100,000 maximum over 2 years' time. But we realized from the beginning that we were not trying to solve the entire problem. These are seed programs. So what we found is that these guys in the universities, you give them $50,000 and turn around 6 months later, and other money has come in to support them from other departments, and some of them get up in the range of $250,000 or $500,000 once it's established and is going. So that's the first thing people should remember if they're going to donate, is your money is going to go a long way with this. The second thing is they should keep in mind that yes, doing it with students is probably not the most efficient way, although you'd be surprised sometimes. And this is one of the things that people always come along and say, well, why don't you just hire somebody to do it and they'll get so much more done. But you got to remember that we're not using students as cheap labor. We're trying to inspire the next generation of students. So keep that in mind as well.
Yeah. Does something resonate with you from what Craig was just sharing, Jim?
Today I went to the GWB sessions, and there was a project in Egypt with the University of Alexandria, and they involved 40-some students. And he talked about how they were inspiring others, and they worked in 2 villages, and he said there's many, many more that these students can impact and train. It was a very impressive thing, and I've seen that. I regularly, when I'm at Image, I go to some of the GWB sessions, and I'm always impressed with what they get done, as Craig says, without very many resources, but they have a passion for it because it's impacting them. And so they build that enthusiasm with their students.
Yeah, we were talking before of how unique it is that the AAPG Foundation gives to the SCG Foundation. That's not a common thing. What do you think allows, by these foundations kind of partnering in this way, really allows the AAPG Foundation to do that it couldn't do by itself?
Well, Bob Merrill brought the 2 organizations together early on. I first learned about it from Mike, and it just resonated with me and others that are involved in the foundation. And you said it right. It would be hard for us to start something like that. And so let's partner together, and we'll get more done.
I think it's not quite the same scenario. It would be different if we were asking AAPG to, hey, you've got a big foundation, why don't you give SCG Foundation $1 million to do something? Well, why do that? And that's what I mean by foundations don't give to other foundations. But this is very targeted. They know that they're going to give us $40,000 or $50,000 or something, but they know it's going to a project that year. And so it's it's as if they were doing it, it's just themselves, but we're facilitating it to have the projects there under review, and they don't have to redo all of that. We talked many times about expanding the whole relationship, and I think we should continue to look at that. I haven't kept up with it, so I don't know, but I would say, besides Bob Merrill and people who are naturally within both organizations, we need to make sure that on that committee that donors like AAPG are represented, and it's valuable input to get the geological point of view, especially when we go into things like archaeology and things like that.
This is kind of a larger question. You can kind of tackle it in any way you want to, but what do you think is the disconnect between donors, be it companies or individuals, in, one of the common themes I'm hearing at Image this year is geoscience education departments being cut, and that's of concern, and we need to be figuring out ways to fund that and get back to that. GWB, as you said to start, Craig, it's 20 years. It was just a struggle finding money. 20 years later, it's still a struggle finding money. Why? I mean, every time I talk to people doing these projects, I just don't understand why donors aren't knocking down the door a little bit. You know, where seems to be the disconnect, be it industry, be it individual donors, where they don't seem to grasp that they could impact these geoscience education departments, where they could impact increasing the funding for GWB and adding more projects. What's the disconnect?
I'm not sure there's a disconnect. I see a lot of factors, one of which is just the business climate. So if you look at the geophysical business, you know, it's been a pretty rough 10 years or so. You have to look at the long-term trend, and somehow a lot of the oil industry missed the shale boom. I don't know how they did it, but they did. And so by the time we got into the mid-2010s and going on to 2015, the shale production was beginning to transform the way geophysics worked. And I think it's transformed it for the long term, actually. To my chagrin, I have felt, I mean, I retired in 2016, but I always felt that we could play a larger role in that, in particular if we took into account the needs of the shale producers. Part of it's geophysicists' problem. They think to do a survey, they have to go out and do a $40 million 3D multi-component, multi-azimuth survey and so on. But, you know, for shale, they don't have time to wait on you. So I envisioned that we could go in there and keep ahead of the crew and be providing information. Well, that really never happened. And so as we came through that, you know, there was significant rearrangement in the business for geophysics. And then we're just sort of coming out of that as we approach the end of the 2010s. And a little thing called COVID hit, and that was like the death blow to a lot of things. And unfortunately, a lot of it was in the geosciences. We had disruptions in our organizations and so on. But I think it's stabilized now for the last couple of years. From what I see, there's resource demand is unchanged. I mean, I have an electric car and I love electric cars, but they're not the way with the future in terms of renewable energy. It's not economic, really. So economic forces have come into play now, and people realize that we need hydrocarbons. And I think the most interesting thing is everybody's talking about data centers and the power that's needed, and I'm going, well, where is the power going to come from? No, they haven't thought about that. They're just going to build data centers. And I can tell you, I don't believe there's enough hydrocarbon to fuel the data centers, not in a reasonable way. I mean, maybe there is as a total resource, but to bring huge streams of hydrocarbons online, it takes 10 years. So there's a big challenge coming, and I think geophysics is going to rebound, and we'll have a lot healthier community. I mention that because our biggest donors in the beginning were not the major oil companies, they were the geophysical service companies. And they were huge donors in the first 10 years. And then they got whacked, and of course, you can't donate to these things if you don't have the profits to do it.
Yeah, I was going to talk about just the demographics of individual donors has changed significantly from in the early days of both our foundations. We had the leaders of those geophysical companies and the leaders of the oil companies. They were very generous, and they gave a lot of funding to both foundations. The current generation of industry leaders has not gotten to the point that they want to do that. And a lot of them are private companies, and they have different motives. And I'll also say there's a lot of places to give money. And this is a fairly narrow niche within a fairly narrow industry. And so you really have to get to people's hearts, in my mind, to get them to support something like GWB. It takes a special kind of giver to support this on a regular basis.
But I feel like we are seeing that. I mean, I just think of the recent earthquakes in Venezuela and Colombia, where you're seeing major impacts of earthquakes and damage, and there is, you know, what would you say is it? And you were talking about the data centers. You know, I do think there is almost like a growing conversation right now of geoscience skills are high in need, whether it's finding hydrocarbons for data centers, the produce water for data centers, whatever it is, there are these natural hazards in Venezuela and Colombia. It is in the news. How do you think we could share, the foundations could share the information that geoscientists can make an impact in the data center areas or in these, actually address these adverse effects on human populations in places like Venezuela and Colombia?
Well, I want to clarify one thing. It is difficult to raise money, but GWB endures. And we manage to do several projects every year, and you just have to look at the statistics that we have, all the countries that we've been in, and how many projects have been completed, how many people affected. So I don't want to leave the impression that it's going down the drain or anything. I think it's quite the opposite, actually. I see a new energy around the foundation, and so I'm confident that as bank accounts heal a little bit, the nature of the people in the geosciences is just, they're no better people because they experience directly, because we go and work in these places. They know what the real life of the people is like, and that's why they're so happy to see us doing something about it. So I think that, in particular, as the baby boomer generation continues to matriculate and they get some retirement accounts there, and they maybe look at the changes in some of the laws that have come about recently, make it quite attractive. And I'll just mention one, a little advertisement here that I found out about recently, which is, I'm at the age now where we have this thing called RMDs in our retirement accounts, required minimum distributions. And they've just allowed in the last few years that when you donate directly from an IRA, a taxable IRA, to a nonprofit, that doesn't cause a tax event for you, and it satisfies the requirements of your RMD. So you can donate from your IRA up to $111,000 this year directly to the GWB, and it won't affect your tax bill, and it will satisfy your RMD requirement. If you had that RMD that you had to take on a taxable basis, well, I don't know what your tax rate is, but let's say it's 25%. You would give 25% to the government. Now, the government needs your money. That's okay as well, but they got a lot of it, so we can spread it back to geoscience.
Yeah, it's called a QCD, Qualified Charitable Distribution, and I use them. I've been using them for longer than I'd like to say, but it's a great way to give. And to your point of it being healthy, Bob said today he gets 40-some proposals a couple times a year and can only fund a handful of them. So the need is clearly there, and done 68 projects, a little more than half in water, which I like, but the earthquakes and the volcanoes and the coastal things today were on the Texas Gulf Coast were very interesting, very helpful.
The one they had last year on a field trip, it's Rob Stewart's project from the University of Houston, and this is just a brilliant use of technology, something I was unaware of, but they use our near-surface imaging capability to go out to the graveyards from the original settlement people in the Houston area, many of whom are minority communities who have been squeezed out of the areas where they used to live, but you have these little pockets of graveyards, and some of them are being maintained and some not, but you can go in with imaging and actually find where the gravestones are and help that reclamation and honoring that. So right here in your backyard, there's things that are happening. So we need to get that message out.
Yeah, and Rob Stewart is being honored tonight for the Craig J. Beasley Award of Social Contribution tonight for that project and many other things that he's been involved in over the years.
Yeah, he's done a lot.
Where do you hope that these GWB projects, you mentioned you really love seeing the water ones, but as you mentioned, there is no shortage of project proposals coming through. Pallavi and her team have a lot of work to do when these project proposals come through. It's very difficult to narrow it down. Where do you hope these projects develop over the next few years?
Well, I'll tell a little story. Several of us on the original committee have had this in mind from the beginning. I have to say in every geologist and geophysicist, there's a little bit of Indiana Jones in them, okay? So we've had this notion that if we could get a project that would be very successful in something, very, let's say, adventurous or sexy or whatever you want to call it, where we find information that makes a big difference in our understanding of the history of civilizations. And we feel like we could make it on the cover of Rolling Stone or National Geographic or whatever, and that kind of visibility would help to fund GWB. People would see it and become inspired. Water is very inspiring to people that know about it, but to some people it's just like, well, water, what do you mean? Just get them some water. But they understand what's happened in the movies, so that's what we'd like to do is to, so that's why we want to have some archaeology and other things, because you never know when you're going to really hit on something.
That's a good point.
You know, again, I think it's raising the awareness. You know, I think Bob said that, and you do that with having impactful numbers. It's not just how many people are actually being impacted. I think in Uganda, it's 30-some thousand people have gotten clean water.
It's huge.
That's significant. That's significant. And I think SEG is doing a good job of promoting and advertising what you're doing. I think that our foundation could take some good lessons from you.
Well, we had a near miss on that archaeology thing a few years back. And there's always discussion on the committee, and God love them, you know, there's so much need in the world. There's nothing that we can just ignore. But there were some people they just didn't see archaeology as something we should be doing when there was so much need other places. But again, it's like, well, if we invest in that and we really hit on one, so that would be something fantastic. So.
Yeah, I like that idea of funding different projects because you just don't know what's going to like grab the public's attention. You know, lastly, in kind of 60 seconds for each of you, what kind of want to leave the listeners with inspiration. So let's say that there was substantial funding that came through for GWB. What do you think you could accomplish with a high level of funding to really maximize the impact and make a difference?
Boy, that's a tough one. I think putting together, again, some signature projects, multi-year funding, more than $50,000, increasing the size of the grants and the scope of the projects, a multi-year project that's got a good probability, high probability of being successful and impacting a lot of people. That would be my metrics.
So if we go back to our first projects, one of the very first ones was a very large water project in Central America. And this is actually how we got the idea to do a Geoscientists Without Borders. This was funded through Engineers Without Borders, and they were actually building an entire water system. And they had large grants from some of the big corporations. I think maybe the Hewlett Foundation gave them several $1 million. So with more money, you can do bigger projects and you can affect more. On that one, we were able to piggyback into it by saying, well, if you're drilling water wells, you know, we can come and provide the imaging for you and the geology for you to make that more effective. So we went in with our little $50,000, but they joined, a multi-million-dollar project. So that's the kind of thing. And again, we wouldn't be trying to do these projects on our own. We would have, if we had that much money, we would attract good proposals from some really credible, not that we don't now, we get great proposals, but they're honestly mom and pop, they're from universities, big famous people and all that, but $50K, you're going to get what you get. And we're doing tremendously on what we do get. I mean, I think my favorite project, it's not a costly thing at all, but is how do you help the populations in the Philippines and Indonesia and places like that do something substantial to help them survive the earthquakes and the volcanic eruptions. I know Indonesia very well. I go out there 2 or 3 times a year. My wife and I do scuba diving and filming underwater. And I'm filming under some of these volcanoes, and there's gas bubbling up right there. And then right over across the strait, there's a huge population. And just 30 years ago, they had a massive explosion and killed a bunch of people. And today you go there and you can see the volcano is puffing right in front of you. Okay, you can't stop that, but what can you do? So this guy in Indonesia came up with this brilliant thing. These populations are not educated. We need something simple, so he came up with this brilliant program called 20-20-20. And it's not expensive. They just use that to educate the local populations to know if the ground shakes for 20 seconds, you have 20 minutes to get to 20 meters elevation. And they would have big parades. You can see the films of it, school kids, everything, 20, 20, 20, all over these islands. And now, I don't know, at least they know what to do, all right? Very simple step. Now, given the traffic situation, they're getting up to 20 meters. Height is, it's not that far away because it's very steep, but it's not easy. So you take it little by little. Now, if we got more money, then we could talk about going back and helping them build survival structures, for example. So there's a lot of things. If you give us the money, we'll find it, okay? We'll find a way.
Yeah, I encourage you, if you're at Image, go to the GWB sessions, go to the GWB reception. That's Ron Harris, who is an amazing, all these project investigators that lead these projects. They're all incredible to talk to and do great work. And the two of you do great work. And I appreciate you sharing your insights of what's going on in both your foundations and sharing a little bit about how GWB got to where it is and where it can get in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you for the
Our
invitation.
pleasure.
Thank you for joining me here on Inside Image. The conversations you've heard today capture the energy, ambition, and collaborative spirit that make Image such a vital gathering for our community. Be sure to catch our highlight episodes, social media clips, and post-event recap, extending the best moments far beyond this week. I'm Andrew Gary. Thanks for listening, and here's to the innovations ahead.